Welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Today, Pat and I are going to be talking about the last Airsoft game that we just played together. So, at time of recording, this was last weekend. This was the first Airsoft game of the season for Pat, and the first game that we've played together in a while. I think the last time that we were together at a game was Last Refuge Spore Cloud, which we ran together. So it's not exactly playing. I mean, we were playing, but not like that.
It's a different variety of Airsoft.
Yeah. And I know that over the winter, we've talked about it on the podcast before, like you did some work upgrading your 249. You brought that out to the field. The first game is always a bit of a shakeout as well.
Yeah. What isn't working?
Yeah. And also what is working. Yeah. And what skills as well, maybe have rusted over a little bit that you need to knock the rust off or the dust off.
How do I pew pew?
Yeah. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like I think some of the players in the community you might not have met before. At the last game, we had some players who'd been around for a while, actually, who came back sort of out of the woodwork. But there were other people there. Actually, there was a few people there who I didn't even recognize. I know that they've been playing at the indoor, but I've never really interacted with them aside from last week, right? Or
there were folks there who I hadn't seen, obviously, since last season. A few of those. Also, at least one new player who I ended up chatting with off and on throughout the day because it was chill. Who plays mostly at the indoor and is sort of like, yeah, I really want to try to get more games at the outdoor. And I was like, well, do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
yeah,
not in a snarky way, just like, yeah, awesome. She was super chill to play with. So like more folks who are, into Airsoft for chill times is basically always welcome in my view.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things we're going to talk about is there was a little bit of negativity that occurred during those games. And I kind of wanted to talk about them and sort of how we choose to approach some of those situations because, and we'll get into it later, but negativity and like players being upset or whatever, that happens to a lot of people. I mean, you just need to go on YouTube and watch, player freak out compilation videos or kicking Mustang videos or whatever, right?
It's easier to find videos of people being pissed off at an Airsoft game than it is to find videos of people playing Airsoft. Like,
or at least responding to an event with a level head or what have you. So I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of what happened with us and sort of what the impact is, because I think that's really important too. Just thinking about, so this stuff happened, like what are you going to do about it, or what did you choose to do about it, or what have you? So anyways, last game that we played, so last weekend, this was reffed by Elizabeth. She's one of our community members and also happens to be a ref at the field. Really, really good time. I felt bad for her because she did not know, or they did not provide her a whistle. So she ended up doing a lot of yelling and shouting throughout the day, which, ripped her vocal fold. But regardless.
And she's relatively speaking on the quieter side, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's one of those things where she should just have used Jeremy or I as a loudspeaker, which we didn't really... Like, I didn't realize she didn't have a whistle until far too late for it to be helpful.
Yeah. But so we ended up doing, kind of what a lot of the similar things that we've done in the past. And so what was interesting is the week previous we had ref with, we had played and Noah was the ref. And so Noah was really very interested in like, let's try new things. Let's try new things. And it's not that Elizabeth wasn't, it's just, her default felt different than Noah's, right? And so we ended up doing some similar game modes that we've done in the past. So like rush games, and like a bomb defense game in the village, etc. And it was really a great deal of fun. I think we got to play together a little bit, which was the source of some frustration for some, which we'll talk about later. But we also got to play against each other, I think through most of the day. And
yeah, absolutely. I mean,
there was a lot of us out there. I think, so when I say us, I mean Storm Riders in particular. I think we had 6 people out. It was yourself and myself, and Stefan, Jason, Kirby, and Josh. Right?
Yep.
Yeah. So there's 6 of us. So three on 3, which was also pretty neat, right?
Yeah. I mean, we like playing together, but like we're also here to shoot each other. Getting shot in the face by friends. Is a positive part of the sport, right? A part of the hobby, whichever way you want to look at it. So that was really great. It was super fun to get to play with, like 6 of us is a pretty decent day
Yeah.
for getting members of our team out all at once, just because we're too many of us are grown-ups with actual lives and jobs at this point.
Yeah,
All of
exactly
us,
right.
you know, like, oof. um anyway, I'll go get my cane. um,
But so prior to the game, Pat and I had been doing some tech work in my garage to try and iron out some of the accuracy issues that I'd mentioned in one of the previous episodes. And so we took the barrel out. We've replaced the MR hop, which was a little worn, and we replaced it with a proper R hop patch. We cleaned out the barrel thoroughly, is 6.01 lambda, and put all reassembled it, went back out in the field. And you know what? The gun was still doing the exact same thing. Like the shots were reaching the end of their flight path and curving very sharply to the left, which meant that there was a spin on the BB that was imparted somewhere in the system. Um, and the flight path was just not really good. And what we were able to do, which was very fortunate, is Jason had a spare gun of his that had a regular M4 hop up, regular like Prometheus 6.03 millimeter barrel. It was a very short one. It was a Mark 18 barrel with an R hop patch in it. And we were just able to remove my barrel and hop up unit, which was a max hop up, and put in this very sort of, aside from the barrel, very basic hop up unit. And it fixed the problem completely. Once I put that barrel in there, I did not have any other shooting issues for the rest of the day. And so my conclusion at the end of it was, well, maybe the 6.01 millimeter barrel is not for me, and maybe the max hop up fundamentally is not going to work in the environment that I put it in, because I have, not the right gearbox shell that I should be using. Perhaps I should be using a VFC one. Like, it's sort of kit bashed. It's a King Arms body. I don't a G&G gearbox. Like Kythera in there. Just trying to mishmash a bunch of parts together that I already have, and fundamentally didn't give the result I wanted. Swapping the
and
barrels is great, and just from that point forward, like I skipped the first game that we played so that I could make the swap, and then after that, it was basically smooth sailing for me for the rest of the day. Like a very small adjustments to the hop, and I was getting exactly sort of the performance I was looking for, right, or close
yeah,
on.
and like, it is one of those, goes to show, like, um, the max hop up um, has performed great in some of our builds, and it has performed less than well in other ones, and that's a nuisance.
That's airsoft teching,
But it's
right?
also,
Like,
yeah, like, it's okay. It doesn't like this particular combination of things. Um, in this case, it's a little weird in that I had a max hop up in more or less that body with, I think, the same gear. No, it would have been a different gearbox shell.
mhm,
Um, running fine. Or no, it would have been in my VFC. Never mind, disregard.
yeah.
So yeah, it does go to show, like, okay, changing a relatively small number of variables can be a huge pain in the ass. The good news is that that puts us really close to getting Phil's gun completely sorted and just like working exactly as he wants it.
Yeah,
Um,
and like I wasn't upset about it. I think one of the reasons why, especially when we talk to beginners about teching, right? Like everyone, myself included, wants the panacea, right? They want the magic bullet, right? You do this and everything will be fine. And these are toy guns. Like that's what they are. They're replica toy guns. Or well, toy replica guns, I guess is the proper word. Anyways, you know what I'm talking about. The tolerances are not where they need to be. You pick up a part and it worked great for one person, but unless that person has exactly the same setup as you, exactly the same setup, then it may not work exactly the same way. It could even be the same replica from the same company, but just two different generations apart. I think, on the Discord we were talking about how a lot of people really crap on Lancer Tactical for being really terrible replicas, but they do so sort of in a vacuum, absent the fact that when you look at the Generation 2, Generation 3 Lancers, they're perfectly fine. They're perfectly serviceable. You can see lots and lots of reviews out there that show that, yeah, they're for, they're are they like the bee's knees? Of course not. But for like a starter replica, to get into the sport, and even some of the more advanced ones are totally fine. They've sorted their QC issues. So that same logic can apply to everywhere. I think we've talked about it with Prometheus barrels in the past, which, 10 years ago, 5 years ago for us, Prometheus was like the be all and end all. And now people are reporting that, yeah, well, sometimes there's QC issues with Prometheus barrels nowadays. And, ZCI or Lambda are better. It was like, okay, cool. Right. Like, again, it's all about production runs. It's all about batching. And so you never really know. And that's why it's so, and I don't mean to make it sound like it's hazardous to upgrade your guns, 'cause that's not the idea. But I think the having the mentality of like, oh, well, this part will fix all of my problems is dangerous. And it's a path that I've tread, a lot over the last couple of years. Chaz would say, well, use the max hop up. And yes, the max hop up is a great unit. But Chaz didn't see the inside of my gun. And Chaz, buddy, I'm not coming after you in any way, shape, or form. These are the decisions that I made based on really good feedback. It's just my setup is not great. When I was using the G and P body previously, that thing was a nightmare to work with, right? Which
Yep.
is why we switched back to the King Arms at the end of the day.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, um, the GNP, like GNP makes good replicas. Um, you can upgrade them. You can do all sorts of stuff with them. It's possible that the answer was just we were trying to do too many different things with that poor gun. In the case of this one, okay, so maybe the Max doesn't like the King Arms gearbox and King Arms body that we were putting it in, right? All right, fair enough. That's a pain, but at least we've sort of figured it out. And ultimately resolving the issue should be pretty easy.
Yeah.
It's not
So
a parts problem that we have a lack of access to, right?
yeah. And I mean, I don't mean to make this podcast a teching podcast like episode. That's not really the point. But just to say that, I hit the field
It's just a risk when you're
and
talking to me.
yeah, well, and I mean, just swapping the barrels was enough. And we were fortunate enough to be able to do that side by side comparison, right? And immediately go, oh, well, this is the problem. And then we're off to the races. So now when it comes time for me to troubleshoot, like what do I need to change? Well, get a different barrel, get a different, and I do have a spare barrel. Get a different hop up unit and figure it out and keep testing. So that's great. You also brought out your 249 for this game.
Yep.
Did you get a chance to use it? I can't recall.
So I didn't end up breaking it out. So for the majority of the games we played, we were like in proximity, like playing in and out of the village.
Mhm.
And the rules on full auto in the village have been, I don't know if they were modified or if I just didn't understand them correctly, God only knows, but have been adjusted to include not shooting full auto into the village. And I felt that if I was going to just put a gun, like I can set the 249 to semi-auto or to semi only, but
Mhm.
like if I'm going to do that, I might as well just stick with the M27. Like
Yeah, 100%.
there's no real benefit there. And like that was not really problematic. It was a little bit like, oh, I guess I don't know if I needed to bring this today, but like the M27 performed really well. I had to dial it in a bit. I changed to 0.36 BBs and like I had to mess around with hop up and get it sorted in that way, but which took a little bit of tinkering. Not like a terrible amount, just where does this work best?
Mhm.
And I'm really quite happy with where it is now. I did
Yeah,
a lot of
you're really reaching out and touching people with it now.
yeah, I did a lot of sort of semi-accurate fire support over the course of the day while I was dialing it in, and by the end of the day, it was like, oh yeah, this is doing what I expected to.
Yeah.
So that's really fun. I had a great time. I had a really, really good day. I was as Phil alluded to at the sort of beginning of the episode, I was pretty cranky for a minute, relatively early on. A player of the field waved at me as I was settling into a spot with my rifle to sort of poke at people from a long range, and I was like, oh, I guess he's out, or what have you. And so when I brought the M27 up, I just sort of like went past him with the scope, looking for someone else further into the village to target, and he shot me in the face.
Mhm.
And I was fairly pissed off just because that seemed fairly like it seemed unsportsmanlike.
Mhm.
Um, but like I made an assumption that I shouldn't have. That's just the kind of human that he is. And I was, pissed about it and sort of taking a minute to try to calm down. And Phil happened by
Yeah.
and was like, "You're not effective here. Go over there and get to work." And then registered that I was pissed and was like, "Are you good?" And I was sort of like grumpily like, "Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, I'm fine. Whatever." Went
Mhm.
off and resumed playing the game effectively. But like it can be really helpful to have teammates who are like, hey, go do something useful to get you out of your head.
Yeah, and I think that it was an interesting moment because like, so Pat described the moment from his perspective, and from my perspective, I'm, you know, up front, I'm maybe 10 meters ahead of him, 30 feet ahead of him, with a group of guys who are trying to advance to the village in point of fact. And we know that we have one, if not two people with long range support rifles, like so Pat and Jason, or Kirby in this instant, not Jason. And um I need those people to be in the fight shooting at angles that I don't have access to when I'm up close, and I know where those angles are. So I'm looking at the guys. I'm like, okay, we need to move. We need to get eyes on behind the old two-story. So I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna go get Pat. I turn around, Pat's there. I'm like, hey, can you get on Crow's Nest? And that's when Pat is like, just looks grumpy. I'm like, are you okay? He's like, yeah, it's fine. And then he, grumpily goes off to do the job.
The word he's looking
And
for is
so
galumphs.
yes, well, I thought about saying that, and then I thought better of it, but you said it, so we're okay. But I think this was really interesting because after the fact, I was like, okay, I need to make sure. In my mind, I was like, I need to make sure that I debrief with Pat about that because that didn't feel good. But we've got other stuff to do right now, which so back to the game. And I knew, like, I was convinced Pat is going to go to the thing and he's going to do the job that I'm asking to. There's no doubt in my mind that he's going to cross his arm. No, I'm not. Like, of course, there's none of that. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, that's cool, but I need to come back to it later. And then later
I
on,
try to
Pat
play
and I,
pew pew guns like a grown up.
well, yeah, but I think that was a really, for me, I think that was a really, like, it's an educational moment, I think, to share because what effectively occurred is you have a situation where you are interpreting what's happening on the field, you specifically, Pat. And so this guy waves at you and then shoots at you, and you're interpreting, unsportsmanlike conduct, let's call it. It's not a penalty because it's not the NHL. And let's face it, sports fans, if this was the NHL, it probably wouldn't have been called anyway. Spoiler alert. Or that's a hot take, not a spoiler alert. It's my hot take. But so this thing happens. Pat interprets it as unsportsmanlike conduct. But in point of fact, that could not have been malice. The guy who did that is one of our locals, and he's just like a jovial sort of guy who likes joking around and stuff.
Yep, totally.
And so from his perspective, he might have just been like, I see Pat, I'm just going to wave at him to be silly or whatever. And then Pat's going to do something about that. Oh, he didn't? Okay, well, now I'm going to blast him, which is, in reverse. I mean, I wouldn't have waved at him, but I can imagine that thought process.
Oh yeah. And like
so,
he checked in with me after and was like, what's up? Are we good? Like, it was ultimately was completely fine. It was just a moment of frustration and being like, God damn it.
And the thing is, like, you caused that for yourself. And I'm not trying to victim blame here, but like your thought process and your analysis of that situation in the moment caused you to feel stressed out and like frustrated or angry or upset or whatever you want to call it. But the thing is, the game is still happening around you. Your team is still relying on you. Well, you were shot, so you had to go respawn. But like your team is still relying on you to come back and do the thing that you're supposed to do.
Absolutely.
And so me coming up to you and being like, hey, this is what I need. If you're in if you're in a brain space where you can just sort of shake that off and go, wait, hang on, wait, like a little slap to the face, right? To be like, wait, hang on, we're still doing a thing. And then you get right back into it. I think that's really instructive because I think we often, and again, we were talking about this in the intro, like you can see videos on videos on videos of grown ass men losing their shit at other people, just behaving like children and not being able to contextualize what just happened or compartmentalize it and say, I'm going to deal with this later. There's a game to be played. Let's go. Let's have fun. Let's win. Let's or lose if that's what's going to happen. Just let's complete what we are doing,
let's
and
do
then
the
we'll
thing
deal
that
with
we're
it.
here
Yeah,
for,
exactly.
Right?
And we'll deal with it after. And so I'm glad that I'm not glad that situation happened. Don't get me wrong, but I'm glad that we debriefed after, and then we were able to have that conversation to say, oh, so that's what happened. Okay, well, we'll know for next time.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
it's ultimately, instructive, right?
Because just to put another third layer on top of this, when I rewatched the video footage of that game, I ran up to you and I was just like, "Hey, get on the crow's nest and provide support fire, or whatever." And then you look pissed off, and then you're like, it's fine, and you go. And so my analysis of the situation was, oh, I just upset Pat some way, and I don't understand what I did. And so it, like, when I checked in with you after, I was like, so I just want to make sure, like, I didn't I didn't upset you, did I? Because my concern was I did something to upset you. So you're worried, you're upset because of something that you interpreted. And then I'm worried that I upset you based on something that I interpreted, not having the whole situation. So taking the time to sort of be like, okay, what the hell happened? Right. Then you sort of paint the clear picture. You're like, okay, so now we know sort of what we can do go forward. Like, I
Yeah,
know that
yeah.
what I said to you now is very unlikely to offend you. I mean, having my head on straight, like I don't really know what I could say that would really upset you.
Yeah, it's not super likely at this point.
Short of
Like,
like name calling which I would never do because like we're friends, right? Like I'm not going to be up here and be like, Pat, you're useless. And even then you'd be like, har, 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 right? Like it's just, the realm, it's not going to happen. But so I think having that conversation was super instructive. So I
yeah.
thought that was,
No, I mean, like,
yeah.
it's a good example in a number of ways. Like, firstly, of like, okay, it's good to have a teammate to get you out of your head, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Because everyone, I think, has moments, especially in combat sports stuff, where you're like, oh yeah, like adrenaline plus getting punched in the face equals a moment of cranky periodically. Whatever.
Yeah.
That's that is a thing. Figure out how to deal with it or find new hobbies.
Yeah.
Right. But also in that, like, you know, we we were constructive. I did the thing, we played the game, we won. Afterwards, we had a chat about it. It was like, okay, we're all okay, good. I had a chat about it with the player who's not on my team, who I don't know as well. That was also good. Cool, carry on, right?
Yeah.
Um, and like, I think, I mean, in fairness, I've been watching a lot of Airsoft videos lately because that's what happens when like the season starts and I start playing Airsoft. I'm like,
Mhm.
more. um, but like, so much of the content out there seems to be negative, and like, I know some of that's like, okay, this is how you get the YouTube algorithm to give you viewers and like let you have good content as well. And I don't mean it critically, but a lot of it is like, negative, like, oh, watch me shoot this airsoft cheater in the face or junk. And like, I think 99% of the time that I've seen people who are, playing airsoft who are air quotes cheating, it's just people who like got hit on the vest and didn't feel it because they were running and their gear moves and, whatever. And there's a tendency to be like, oh man, that dude's not calling hits, or your gun's not reaching him. Right.
Yeah.
And like, or my gun's not reaching them because it's not dialed in how I want it to be.
I love how in
Um,
those videos they often will put like a hit indicator, like in Battlefield or whatever, to basically telegraph to you, the viewer, that that actually did connect. Even though in a lot of cases in some cases you absolutely can see the BB connect. That's fine. But in some cases you don't really know. Like you can't visually ascertain that the BB actually hit the target, but they put the hit indicator, so you're like, oh, they must have hit him, so that guy must be a cheater. And it's like, well, you don't actually know that,
yeah, well, I
right?
mean,
But
like,
that's beside the point.
and like, I've had people be like, oh, like, I saw you flinch, I hit you. And I'm like, no, you saw me flinch because you shot a BB 6 inches from my eyeball into a piece
Yeah.
of wood next to me. And I'm,
Yep.
like,
100%.
you do. Um, and in fairness, like, I'm sure I've made that assumption. I don't think I, got in people's fries about it. That's not really how I do. But, I'm sure I've been like, that dude's not calling us hits at some point when it was just complete innocence, you know.
Mhm.
I mean, there've been instances where like it was a kid, and I don't mean like a 14-year-old. I mean like, a 10-year-old playing with his dad or whatever. And it's like, that's a separate thing for me where it's like, okay, I'm not gonna like get pissed off at a literal child.
Yeah, exactly,
you know,
right.
that's not how this works. And it's not how it should.
Mhm.
But like, I don't know. I think, um, bring a positive attitude to your airsoft game and you'll have a good time. Like
Yeah.
Jeremy was a huge positive for me for the entire day, just because he was so in it. I mean, he's sort of our morale officer, just in that he's so boots first into everything he does, and so jovial and like
Mhm.
you know into it. It's wicked. It was really really good playing with him, and it his attitude was super positive throughout the day, and it definitely, I got a lot of laughs out of it.
Yeah, and and we'll come back to sort of the attitudes and stuff because I think one thing that's really important for people to remember is like you're never going to be able to control how other people in the field behave, nor can you control the fact that you are going to get hit. And sometimes you get hit and you see red. I got hit in the nose and you see red. And so the only thing you can control fundamentally is how you respond to things. And so I want to come back at the end, but I want to talk about like some of the games that we played because I think some of the games that we played were really fun. So we played two in particular where we played together as a team. That one was the rush game. So what we call a rush game is basically we start at one end of the field and then we have to capture basically three flags in a linear way. And as soon as we capture that flag, that's our new spawn point. And then the defenders are pushed back. So I think that game that's called like Bomb Rush or something like that in Battlefield. So it's inspired similar to that. And typically when we played this game mode in particular and we are the attackers, we have no trouble getting the first flag, but then we really get bogged down getting the second flag. And typically the third flag is in the village, which means that we are assaulting the village from the woods, which is actually quite challenging typically because if your defenders are well entrenched and they're in good fortified positions, as we discovered later on in the day, I mean, you can hold that all day long.
Yeah, I mean, you're attacking people who, like, if they're coordinating, have a lot of overlapping fields of fire, a lot of good cover, and you don't have a lot to approach with.
Yes. Yeah. There's only one blind spot, really. If you're approaching in a linear fashion, which we were, we couldn't loop around and attack from the other side. We had to go directly at it. And so I think we did really, really well getting to the first objective. That's usually not a problem because we're the on that field, like the cover is, more or less equivalent.
Totally.
And so our strategy is always sort of like whittle them down a little bit, get them to eventually run out of their lives, so they have to push back to the next spawn, and then we have an easier time moving
it's
up,
worth
right?
clarifying really briefly. So, like, the attackers in this game mode have infinite lives but finite time, and the defenders have 2 lives per flag, essentially, per player. So, like,
So when they, yeah,
you can just theoretically run them out of lives if you're shooting really, really well.
but you need to be quick because like typically for like when we did this game mode 2 weeks ago with Noah, he gave us 6 minutes to get to the first objective. Then once we got that, we got an extra 2 minutes on the clock for the second one, and then a 2 minutes on the clock for the third one. And it's like, bro, that's like 10 minutes total. Like that's not a lot of time.
What's up? Do this quickly. Chop, chop. Okay.
Yeah. And so you really, those lives are limited for the defenders, but fundamentally, like it's more about. So with Elizabeth, she gave us more time. But regardless, I think we were really well coordinated. We got the first flag, and typically that's where it falls apart. We did a really good job pushing through, although that's where one of the other things that occurred throughout the day. We had one of our players who was basically sitting on the spawn, and he would get shot and he would just duck down, respawn, and come right back up, which was extremely frustrating for the other team. And
it's sort of a like,
yeah,
it's one of those, okay, the rules certainly say I can do this. And it happens periodically, but also maybe we should like tinker with the rules so that doesn't happen anymore, kind of thing.
Yeah. So like in the video footage that I was reviewing, like you can hear some players shouting at each other about like you have to go respawn. I did, blah blah blah. It's like, okay, fair enough. But ultimately, that didn't last very long because we pushed them back so far and we captured the next respawn point. So we were moving on, and
that respawn didn't remain in play as a respawn point for us for long enough for it to be a real problem.
Yeah, exactly,
or at least for it to be a protracted problem during play, which is good.
And so really the last bit of it was us moving from the second last flag into the village, and that's the sort of timeline wise, that's where you got shot in the face and I saw you, and we were trying to coordinate our pieces. And fundamentally, the only way that we could realistically assault into the village, the way that the village is set up is that it's on this like flat piece of land, and there's a bit of a drop off, and so you're in a bit of like a defilade essentially. Now it's a stream, so if you're in there,
the
you're
defilade is a little wet.
Yeah, but regardless, like when you're in there, you're very well protected. So the only way that we could really effectively assault would be for us to provide a tremendous amount of volume of fire, or set up a base of fire, basically just pouring BBs into the village and letting the more advanced people just rush as quickly as they can, get into positions, and ultimately get that foothold into the village. It's a whole like Area 51, they can't shoot all of us situation. Like, and so lots of people ran in, took a lot of casualties. Doesn't matter. We have unlimited respawn, so who cares? And then we got a couple people into the village using our communications.
And the last respawn point before the village is fairly close. So like, it is a thing where you can kind of just try to rush it and push past effectively.
Yes, definitely.
At the cost of getting shot a whole bunch. But like, what are we here for?
Yeah, and so we had a lot of players who were putting like effective fire down through the base, like because we play at this field all the time. We know what the effective lanes of fire are. So we were putting, keeping heads down in all those areas, allowing our guys to rush in, and then relatively in short order, myself, Jason Fong, Josh, were in the center of the village, capping the flag, and that was that. And um, that would be have been a lot more difficult if we hadn't had good, solid communication. And to be honest, it probably could have even been better. Like we could have done that faster if we had really just sort of taken our head out of our proverbial rear end for that middle period in the like near the bus and trying to figure out ourselves. We could have ironed that out much sooner.
Yeah, Phil took.
But
I mean, Phil always takes video of stuff, and so he posted just to the our group a video of that from his point of view, and watching it was sort of like you can see it go really well, and then become kind of a soup sandwich in the middle, and then congeal back into a plan.
yeah,
And it was like, oh yeah, we need to sit down and like hash out a better way of doing this middle piece than what we did.
yeah. At the end of the day, like, was it a huge deal? It's like, no. I think the lesson learned for us is okay. Like Pat said, like we need to figure out like what does that middle part look like a little bit more. How do we improve our comms to make sure that we're a little bit more organized? But actually, we did pretty okay.
Totally. Like
Um,
it's not a
so
yeah,
yeah,
I don't mean it as a like, oh man, it went badly. It's just a like, oh yeah, we can tighten this up a bit, I think, and that would be good.
yeah. Um, And then the other game that we played was a village defense game where basically we had to plant a prop bomb somewhere in the village, and then the other team had to make their way into the village, find the bomb, and leave. Fundamentally, this is just a village defense game, right? It's a village defense with extra steps because where we decided to plant the bomb, they had the whole field to attack from. So they weren't just limited to one fire lane. They could go basically, aside from the swamp side, which nobody ever uses because it's swampy and disgusting. We
Not
basically
worth
had
it.
a 270-degree arc to cover, basically, right? And so we planted the bomb right at the base of that arc so that that was the furthest point that they had to go to find it, and they also had to find it. They didn't know where it was. So that would be very difficult for them to do without us sort of being being out of the game, like being either all at the respawn or whatnot.
Yeah,
But
they needed to hammer us pretty hard in order to get a workable
yeah.
play approach there. And like I think in their defense also, that game mode, the timer might have been shorter than was reasonable for that game mode. Um
Mhm.
that being like, and I don't mean that as a criticism of Elizabeth or like anything. It's just a like sometimes you try something and it's like, we probably should have left that a little longer.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, I think for us, like on our side, I think we did a tremendous job. Like we were extremely well organized. So we had two people, we had Pat and we had Jason on Overwatch in a two-story structure. And then we had the rest of our forces split basically 60-40 in the village with two on the left-hand side and then the remaining three on the right-hand side. And we were coordinating and talking and communicating on comms
Yep.
basically the entire game.
Yeah, the fact
And
that the fire support was able to
yeah.
sort of like move as needed to where they were pushing, plus just I mean we've defended the village enough that like we have a really solid grasp on the fire lanes,
Mhm.
but we were also communicating effectively enough that like if someone went down, it was like, oh yeah, we'll just fill that hole until they spawn
Not that
really
that really
readily.
happened.
Yeah, fair. It
Yeah.
went a little bit on the clockwork side for us, I think.
Yeah, like there were parts
Um,
where I was sort of on the front of the village and I would see a guy run across to my left and I would shoot at them and I wouldn't be able to get them for whatever reason. I would call up to upstairs and I would say, "Hey, there's a guy on the left in the woods. They're here." Jason would be like, "Yeah, okay, hang on, I'm on it." And he would go out and he would shoot the guy and he'd come back in and be like, "All right, he's done." Great. And like we just repeated that over and over and over for the entire duration of the game. And that was a really good example of very effective coordination. On the flip side, though, the task that they were set to do, regardless of whether it was the timer was short or not, that's a very tall order.
totally.
It's attacking the village is always very difficult. It requires a tremendous amount of coordination. And when you have a team of people who are used to talking to each other and working together, going up against a random group of people or a group of people, like pockets of people who play together, it becomes very difficult to actually be effective against them because you don't have the volume of fire, the mass of movement, the fire, the fire base, the base of fire, the maneuver element, like all you don't have any of that stuff. And so people might be keeping my head down, but they weren't keeping Fong's head down, and Fong come out and blast him. And that was the end of it. Same thing on the right hand side.
Well, and just
Like, Screech was doing stuff, and then Kirby, next thing you know, Kirby was blasting the guy who was shooting at Screech, and that was the end of that. And just repeat for 10 minutes, right?
and I mean, it's one of those things where I think it demonstrates really well that um, fire and maneuver works really well. So does, oh, I'm taking fire, someone else deal with this problem for me, if the comms are really clear, right?
Mhm.
There were a couple of situations where I know you guys on the left hand side were taking, or the folks on the left hand side were taking fire, and it was just like, hey Pat, I don't have an angle on this person, and I'm like, yeah, I do.
Yeah.
you know and likewise, there was at least one point where I was like, yeah, I'm taking effective fire, and Fong was like, I'm not. Right, and it's
Yeah.
just like, cool. um
For a game like that, you really need to have a strategy because for us, we had a strategy. Like we looked at what we need to do and we're like, okay, well, we're doing concentric rings of defense, we're doing here, and then we're going to do this. If the other team doesn't have a strategy, then it becomes very difficult for them to be effective. And unfortunately, like in this particular game, like a strategy would be, well, instead of attacking both sides simultaneously, we might mass attack one side because they might think, okay, well, they have a guy on the left and his job is to protect the left, and he's not going to leave that unless like disaster happens. And that's what would have happened. Like if they had mass attacked the left side, I would have held my position because my job was to protect that left flank,
yeah, and I mean,
right?
there's a piece in there where, like, I hope we didn't test this piece, but like, I hope we're flexible enough that, like, if we're observing that the entire team is attacking one section of the line,
Sure.
will adjust. But the time it takes us to adjust gives the other team a chance to win. So
Yeah.
that has value to them, right? I think probably one of the biggest challenges for the other team was just, people were kind of doing their own thing, which means we were getting attacked piecemeal. And so, like,
Mhm.
a person pops out of cover and starts shooting at you, and I go, well, they don't know where I am, and I shoot them. And they go, well, I don't know where that came from. I guess Phil shot me, and go back.
And to be
And
clear, like we were outnumbered, but that didn't really matter. Anytime someone shot at us, they got two guns shooting back at them,
yeah,
right?
right. And it's just,
And yeah.
it,
And so
it
like I
wasn't
think
six guys shooting at me, right?
to come back to the frustration theme that we talked about and negativity stuff that we talked about at the beginning, like I can understand being on the other side of that and being like, okay, so like we're going up against guys who are coordinated and they have experience and resources at their disposal, etc. And to be honest, the games that we were paired together were games that really promoted good strategy.
Yeah.
So if you put us in those positions, it's going to be easier to be successful because we're accustomed to coming up with a strategy and executing on it and stuff
Yeah. I
like
mean,
that.
if you put all
Although
of
we did play
us,
a game later where when we attacked, we were split up, and that was putting the bomb on the Blackhawk field or
yeah,
whatever, right? And we were split up for that. So it's not every game, but those two games in particular when we were together, like strategy was an important part of that.
and
And if you don't have one on the other end, you're climbing up a steep hill,
like
right?
at the same time, I think one of the realities is also that, like, they're the kind of thing where some of the stuff that we have, both the time playing together and the practice and the experience trying different stuff tactically, works to our advantage. Like, I think if you put six of us against six people in just like a team deathmatch format, we're not going to come out that far ahead. I mean, there are definitely people who aren't on our team who are better in like CQB personal skills than I am by a bunch.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think there are a ton of people in the like general airsoft community outside of our team here who are as good at like keeping heads down as part of a coordinated effort, or providing sort of long range support where I'm taking people out as needed as I am, because I don't think those are skills that the community practices, right?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and that's not to say that I'm like exceptionally proficient at either of those things, just that they're things that I've done a lot more of than the average airsofter who's not playing or used to playing with, a fire team of 4 or 6 guys on the regular.
Yeah.
Um, so like it's just sort of, there are game modes that are going to be to the advantage of any group of players who are playing together and in a coordinated fashion. I know we've harped on this before, but like, I cannot stress enough how useful like having radios and decent comms discipline is for
Yeah.
playing any kind of airsoft game. um, you know,
Well, this is why, like, I mean, like, to talk about it sort of in a bit more detail, like when when we were cluing up the day, there are some people had decided to leave, and they had decided to leave because they were upset about how some of the games, in their words, were sort of unfair because we were playing as a team, and all this kind of stuff. And what was really unfortunate about that situation is that those complaints were never addressed directly to us or to the game organizers or anything. They just took their stuff and went home. And the challenge is, like, we can't actually fix anything or can't change anything if we're not made aware firsthand that there's a problem there. Because we played lots of games where we were together, we played lots of games where we were separate, and aside from those individuals, like, nobody really had any issue with it. That whole respawning issue sort of aside. But the truth of the matter is like, we don't, like, there's nothing secret squirrel, there's nothing magic about what we do. And in fact, if you look at us as we are currently as a team, most of us are not at the peak of our performance on the team. We have all, by and large, been better at airsoft in the past than we are today. We have all, most of us, have been in better physical shape in the past than we are today, right? The differentiator for us, and it's not like we're out there training as a team every week either. That ship has sailed a long time ago, right? Realistically, the only thing that sort of separates us from anybody else who plays is just the fact that we've been playing a really long time, and we have a good understanding, and with each other for a really long time. We have a good understanding of how each other work. We have an understanding of what works in airsoft and kind of what doesn't. We have a good understanding of the field that we play on. And aside from that, anyone who plays in our community can be just as good, if not better than us. There's lots of players who play in our community who I think are way better than me personally, right? I'm not going to name them. You know who you are, but that's the reality. And if you think you're better than me, well, then that's great. Like, I prefer to play with people who are better than me because it helps me become better, right? The whole rising tide lifts all boats situation. But like, the challenge is that, like, if you're gonna play airsoft, there will be people who are better at it than you, and there will be groups of people who also, as a group, are better than your group of people. And is that going to cause you to lose? Well, it certainly might. But as we've often discovered, and this is, one of the things that I find so interesting about, people who have in the past, like, complained that playing against us is unfair or anything like that. Often when we play together, we lose because, as Captain Picard said, you can do everything right and still lose. And so there are lots of games where we come up with a great plan, we get into whatever position, and some kid with a renter blasts us in the chest. And I was like, oh well, I guess that's it,
yeah,
right?
I mean, one of the big practical realities of this as a sport, as a hobby, is just, yeah, you're gonna get shot. Sometimes that's your plan. Doesn't matter,
Hmm.
right? And you can look at us and go, okay, like, it's not fair. They play together and they're good, so we're losing. It's like, well, I have sort of several responses to that. The first one is like, okay, have you tried changing your approach at all? Or, are you just like, okay, well, I'm going to run forward and shoot and they're going to shoot at me.
Hmm.
Ignoring that for a second, though, if the criticism is those 6 guys playing together is, unfair and unfun, and like, you know, at least one of those games, the other team had an enormous numerical advantage. Like,
Yeah.
so come on. Um, Figure out how to use it, figure out how to coordinate people, figure out how to be a leader instead of getting angry with the fact that we're winning. But also talk to us. Like, there is no one on our team who will look at you and go, oh yeah, don't split us up. Right.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
we will always be like, hey, can we play a couple of games together as a team? Because that's kind of the point of being a team, you know.
Yeah,
But like if we play 8 games over the course of a Saturday or 10 games, and we get to play 2 together as a team, we're delighted, right?
yeah,
You know, if you want to
exactly
break us
right.
up the rest of the time because it makes it easier to balance teams or more fun or more fair or just whatever, sure, no problem. You know,
Yeah.
I'll get shot by Phil.
And like the thing is, like, there absolutely is a case where we go, okay, well, maybe it doesn't make sense to put us together on the defense on a strategic game like Bomb Rush or a village bomb defense or something, because like we are so strong at doing that,
Yeah, and maybe
right?
don't do that too
And
often. Fair enough.
yeah, and like if someone were to say, you know what, we're not going to put you together on this game because I think it wouldn't make sense, it wouldn't be fun for everyone. Cool, absolutely, because that I think you nailed it. Like if someone says to us, hey, we're going to split you up for this game, the answer is always okay, right? We've never been in a situation where we've said like, oh well, we want to play together or else we're not going to play.
Yeah.
That never
No,
happens.
I mean, like,
And
you know, we
the games that we did play together, we didn't ask to be paired together either. That's just the way that the ref decided to set up the games, which is totally fine.
yeah, and I mean, like,
But
you
at
know, I
the
think
end
the
of the
refs at
day,
Frontline are aware that we like playing together and try to accommodate us again some number of games out of the day. But like, we're not looking at them and being like, oh, you know, do this or we'll be cranky at you. You know, like that's
yeah.
not the vibe. To
And I
borrow
think
the line
too,
from the
like,
kids, right?
you know, let's be clear, like we're showing up to these games, we're showing up paying customers to play with our friends. So if you're showing up to the game with your friends, being like, I want to play with my friends, but the Storm Riders can't play together because that's not fair. That's a double standard. Like you can't have that, right? You might say, well, I don't care about being split up, and guess what? Neither do we,
You know,
right?
I mean, and
But
at the end of the day,
coming back to it, I think what the key message here is, if that is actually your concern, which is absolutely legitimate, well then you need to talk about it. You need to talk about with the ref, you need to talk about the game organizers, and not like under your breath as you're leaving, but like, hey, this is not fun for me anymore. I would really like to split this game up. Otherwise, I don't think I'm going to stay because this is not fun.
yeah, and
And that's the approach that you want.
you know, and like with admittedly a little bit of frustration, you know, complaining the week after about, you know, a call the ref made or like the way the ref organized something isn't fair to the ref, who is, you know, an
Mm-hmm.
employee who's getting paid, who's all of in our community and frankly in all of our listeners communities, who is trying to do their best to make sure you have a fun day. Like, you know, that's the function of the ref in the game, and I like to think that everyone is really trying to just do the best they can with that. So like if you're
Yeah.
going, man, you know, I have a problem with so and so and the way he or she or whatever refed something last week or 2 weeks ago, like that's not helpful.
Yeah. Especially if that thing that's been bothering you keeps happening and it keeps bothering you. It's like, well, it keeps happening because no one's aware that it's an issue, right? And this comes back to what we were saying at the beginning. Like you need to address some of these issues. Like we're all here to have fun, right? So if you are not having fun, well, you should really think about critically why that is. Because if it's for a legit, and to give you just an easy example, if you're not having fun because one of the teams is respawning like on their spawn point and immediately blasting you, and that's not fun, I would kind of agree. I think that
Yeah,
kind of is not fun. That's something you should bring up, and we need to make and address it to make sure that, hey, next time that's not going to go because we don't want
you know,
that to continue. That's not a fun game
but
mechanic, right? It's
also
game breaking.
like, you know, straight up, there's a solution for next time. There's also a solution right at that moment of, hey, ref, this is happening. Can you deal with it? That's the
Yes.
point of having a ref, right? Because, you know, at the end of the day, the player who was responding like that's answer was, well, you know, there's nothing preventing me from doing that. That is a perfectly legitimate use of the rules as they currently stand. Okay, the ref's the arbitrator of that. That's who should have been dealing with that.
And so, actually, funny, it's as a segue. When we were playing the defense game, I was on the front, like the corner building of the village, which was giving me a really good fire lane into the big fort and all this kind of stuff. And Elizabeth caught my attention. She's like, "Hey, move back a bit. It's too much." And I was like, "Okay." I did not even quite. The only thing I questioned was whether she was talking to me or not. And once I had acknowledged that she was indeed telling me to move back, I immediately did so, and not just like 6 inches. I went like one concentric, because we had set up concentric rings. I fell back one concentric ring. I'm like, that's it. That's what the ref just told me to do. That's what we're going to do. So like that is the ref's function, and that's how you should really be interacting with them. And like I also, I understand, because we've had lots of conversations, or I've had lots of conversations with people who play airsoft in much bigger areas, much bigger fields with huge communities and stuff. And people come and go and they leave in a huff and you go, yeah, whatever, whatever. Fair enough, right? But for many of our listeners, and some of you might even be local, and if you recognize yourself on this podcast, we're not, trying to throw any shade on you, but just think about it, right? For a lot of us who play in smaller communities, like I think about Bench, who plays in Slovenia. He's got, like a smaller community. Like keeping our players happy and coming back and stuff it's a crucial part of building a strong airsoft community, and dealing with issues and understanding what people find fun and what they find unfun. That has to be at the forefront of having those conversations, because nobody wants to go and use, especially like for us, you were talking at the start, like we have, like, we're adults, we have a lot of adult responsibilities. Like if I'm going to dedicate 3 hours or 6 hours or 12 hours of my weekend to go play airsoft, I better be having fun, because I don't have a lot of 3 hours or 6 hours or 12 hours to throw around.
Totally. And
Right.
it's also one of those things where, like, yeah, the takeaway I want anyone who's listening to this to have is, like, yeah, talk to people about what's going on at your games. If there's something that you think could be better, if there's something that's unpleasant, if there's something that's going on that you're not down for, right? Like, people can't read your mind. And almost universally, attributing a behavior on the field to malice, as I did with the, like, guy waving at me in the moment, right?
Hmm.
That was just, that's who he is. That's how he be. That's how he plays. All right, whatever. That's not a problem. The issue was Pat, right? Then Pat compounded the issue by getting in Pat's head. And then Phil said, go do something useful. And Pat did. And that was good. Great.
Mm,
That is a pretty good outcome, because I wasn't a dick to anybody, right?
exactly. Like at the end of the day, like what if you're going to complain about stuff, which is fine. Like if you're not having fun, you should be complaining
Totally.
about it, right? Because you're paying money and investing your time to be there. But what is the outcome that you want, right? Because if you don't want anything to change and you just want to complain, well then fine, that kind of sucks. But I mean, okay, whatever.
Weird, but all
But
right.
if you're complaining about it because you want to play airsoft and you want to enjoy it and you want to be in a community that makes you feel like you have a place, and that it's a fair and equitable play system and all this kind of stuff, like what is your expectation, right? What is it that you want to see change, and address it with the people who have the ability to make that change, right? Not everything can be done, right? If your complaint is that, well, when those players play together, it's not fun, ergo they should not play together, that's not going to go, because just as though you have the right to show up and play with your friends, we have the same right to show up and play with our friends because we're paying customers. Does it mean we have to do it all the time? No, we're absolutely willing to find a middle ground, but we have to have the conversation. If you're saying, well, it's not fair that Pat has machine guns, nobody should have machine guns, replicas I'm talking about, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like why would we put a ban on a particular class or type of airsoft replica because you don't have one and you think they're unfair? It's like, well, in that respect, I mean, we're not saying that airsoft is pay to win, but like if you pay for an airsoft toy, whether it's an airsoft grenade, like I don't have grenades currently. I'm not going around being like, oh, ET hit me with a grenade when I was in the bunker. That's not really fair. It's like, no, it's like I get my own, like whatever, right? Or just deal with it one way or another. Like, what is the outcome that you're looking for with that complaint, right? And if the outcome is truly like, I want to make this better, I really want this to not happen again, I want this to change, it's got to be addressed with the right people.
Totally. And I mean, one of the funny things there, to use the LMG as an example, right? So, like, the number of folks who find HPA LMGs, I guess, to be a questionable tool in airsoft seems to be relatively high. Um, you know, not that I can necessarily judge, like, from the case studies of various videos on the internet, but, like, at the end of the day, if someone looks at me and goes, "Hey, Pat, you've been using your LMG and I'm getting sick of dealing with it as a mechanic in games, can you switch to another replica? My answer is actually still going to be sure. You know, like
Yeah.
if you look at me and go, never ever use that again, I'm going to be like, what? But
Yeah.
it's the difference between like, one of these is a reasonable request, and like I have a substantial supply of other options. um, it's also worth noting, like, frankly, if you have a HPA rig and you're like, yeah, I'm tired of Pat using his LMG. I wish we had an LMG. I'm going to bore my LMG. Like, you know,
Well, yes, I thank you. I
oh,
would.
there you go. Right. But it's, it's about communicating, and like communicating in a spirit
Yeah.
of sort of genuineness and of, of being chill, of being friendly, dare I say, of being sportsmanlike.
Yeah. And just to wrap this up, I think that I don't want anyone to take away that we didn't have fun. I think we had a
Man,
great time. Elizabeth, after the game, asked me, did I have fun? And I felt kind of bad because I said, yeah, I had a great time. She's like, well, at least someone did. And it's like, you know what? That kind of sucks that you feel that way because it was a great day. It's just, and I'm the kind of person, like, if people are coming to the field and they're not having fun, I kind of take that personally because I want everyone to have a good time. And if I'm being a part of why you're not having fun, then I want the opportunity to set that straight. And if the answer is you don't have the opportunity because I don't want you to, well, that kind of sucks. But I mean, it is what it
but
is.
that
I
kind
really
of
wish
sucks,
that
and it's
we
not
could
going to
get
change
there.
very easily. But okay,
Yes.
fair enough.
Yeah.
But like,
Yeah. It was a great day. And I think, we had sunshine, which was
man,
awesome,
I
which we
had
hadn't had in a
a
while.
blast. I am bummed that, like, so this weekend you're running a marathon, and I have a collectible card game tournament.
Yes, they're about the
Well,
same amount of endurance, I would say.
I suspect that you are a little bit off, but yeah, no, one of us is doing something good and useful with their weekend, and I'm playing cards. um,
Good and useful.
you know,
That good, maybe useful. Eh.
whatever. We're both having fun. Unfortunately, we're both having fun that's not airsoft shaped. And genuinely, I had such a good time last weekend that I'm a little bit like, oh, I wish the Flesh and Blood pre-release was on Sunday, because then I could do
Yeah,
both. But you know,
priorities.
it is what it is.
And the weekend after, so the weekend actually after this podcast goes live is going to be Operation Touchdown. So that's going to be super fun. Really looking forward to that.
I am stoked.
And
I like, as anyone who's been like a long time listener or a recent listener is aware, it's going to be not a game where Phil or I get to play a whole lot of airsoft, but it is a game where we get to do a lot of making sure people hopefully have fun playing a lot of airsoft. So that's
yeah,
going to be really,
absolutely.
really good.
Yeah. Well, guys, thank you so much for listening. That's really all we have for you this week. Next week, you will hear all about a American Milsim. The guest on the podcast next week is going to be Bo Stewart, one of the co-founders of American Milsim. They just wrapped up their ESR game, and so we'll be talking to him. We're going to be talking about Iron Horse, which is happening at the end of June. So check us out for that conversation. But until that time, that's all we've got for you. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Have a good week, everyone.